They didn't notice I'd stopped breathing. Not literally, of course. I was still sitting there at the long banquet table, still holding my coffee cup, still wearing the polite smile of a man who'd spent 65 years knowing how to behave in public. But inside, something had gone silent. On the wall behind my oldest son, a massive projector screen flickered with images, the grand finale of the evening's family history presentation. My daughter's voice, sweet and steady through the microphone, narrated over the slideshow, and here we see the milestone years, the moments that made us who we are today. Photo after photo. Birthdays. Graduations. Vacations. New homes. Weddings. Not one of them with me in it. Worse, moments I knew I'd been there for were credited to others. The fishing trip I'd taken my boys on? Labeled Uncle Greg teaching the kids patience. The kitchen renovation I'd paid for down to the last nail? Mom's dream project, thanks to her savings. Even my late wife's retirement party, the one I'd planned for months, the one I'd given a toast at, was framed as a surprise from the children. I set my coffee down before my hand betrayed me. Across the table, my wife laughed at something our son-in-law whispered to her. She didn't look at me. My children didn't either. They were too busy nodding along with their own carefully rewritten history. When the final slide faded to black, there was polite applause. My daughter leaned into the mic again. That's our story. Thank you, everyone, for being part of it. Our story. I scanned the room, memorizing every face, every expression. The polite satisfaction. The subtle pride. The way no one, not a single person, noticed the gaping hole where I should have been. I didn't speak. I didn't make a scene. I simply folded my napkin, placed it neatly beside my plate, and smiled at my wife when she finally looked my way. The applause died down. The room filled with the clink of silverware and low chatter. My children laughed easily, like nothing had happened. And maybe for them, nothing had. But for me, the silence in my chest had already hardened into something else. Something heavier. Colder. They thought they'd erased me. They had no idea I was about to write them into a story they couldn't escape from, one with official case numbers and sworn statements. And my ending would be the only one that mattered. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and hit the like button. Your support helps us bring you even more incredible stories. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove past my street, past the familiar glow of my porch light, and kept going until the city thinned into empty highway. The road was dark and quiet, the kind of quiet that sharpens your thoughts until they cut. I replayed the slideshow in my mind, every missing image, every reworded memory. It wasn't an accident. You don't forget an entire person when you're combing through decades of photographs. This had been deliberate, coordinated. By the time I stopped at an all-night diner on the edge of town, my grief had shifted. The hurt was still there, but it had a shape now. A plan was starting to take form around it. They hadn't just erased me from the family story, they'd stolen my place in it, which meant they'd underestimated me in the worst possible way. I'd built a career on details. Contracts. Paper trails. Numbers that told the truth no matter how many lies surrounded them. And over a lifetime, I'd built something else too, a network. People who owed me favors. People who still answered my calls. People who had access to the kinds of records you couldn't just Google. The waitress brought me coffee. I sipped it slowly, letting the caffeine work while I listed names in my head. Bank officers. Retired detectives. City clerks. Accountants. If I was going to respond, it had to be decisive. Public. Permanent. Not a shouting match in a restaurant or a bitter holiday letter. No, I wanted their names engraved in a place they couldn't whitewash or crop me out of. I wanted their friends, neighbors, business partners, everyone they relied on to see exactly who they were. And I already knew where to start. Back at my house, the attic was cold enough to bite. Boxes stacked in neat, labeled rows, taxes, property, receipts, journals. I pulled one down and sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through the years like turning the pages of my own private archive. Old diaries, notes from meetings, copies of deeds, bank statements with signatures that didn't look quite right. Interesting. I stacked the most promising folders beside me. The more I read, the clearer the picture became. Hidden income, transfers through shell accounts, property sold at suspicious losses. They'd been sloppy, confident, too sure no one would ever look closely. By the time dawn seeped through the attic window, I had the start of something that could destroy them completely. I didn't feel tired. I felt awake in a way I hadn't in years. They'd written me out. I was going to write them in ink they couldn't erase. The attic dust still clung to my clothes when I made my first call. Harold. The voice on the other end was warm but cautious. Haven't heard from you in, 5 years? 6, I corrected. And I wouldn't be calling this early if it wasn't worth your time. The pause was short. Where do you want to meet? By 8:15, I was sitting in a corner booth of a small coffee shop 3 towns over, the kind of place where no one paid attention to anyone else. My contact arrived exactly on time, looking the same as when we'd worked together. Pressed shirt, sharp eyes, and a habit of scanning the room before sitting down. I need access to municipal records, I said without preamble. Property sales, business permits, building inspections, going back 10 years. And I need them quietly. A single raised eyebrow. Family dispute? You could say that. I slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of questionable documents I'd found in the attic. Start with these names. You'll see the patterns fast enough. He flipped through the pages without comment, but I caught the way his mouth tightened. You realize some of this is borderline criminal. Borderline now, I said evenly. But with the right context, it could be much more. That got a small, knowing smile. Give me 48 hours. I didn't stop there. By noon, I'd spoken to 2 former banking colleagues. One still worked at a regional branch. The other had moved into private financial auditing. Both owed me more than one favor. I need to know if these accounts exist, and if they do, I want transaction histories, I told the first. And if they don't? Then I want to know who's been pretending they do. The second contact was more blunt. You're talking about your own family here. I'm talking about people who think family is a tool for theft, I said. I'm done letting them use my name to keep their hands clean. Each conversation left me with more pieces of the puzzle. Some of the shell companies were registered out of state. Others shared mailing addresses with businesses I knew had folded years ago. The deeper I went, the more tangled it became, and the more confident I felt that I was holding a fuse no one else knew was lit. That night, I dug deeper into my own records. My old journals read like a banker's logbook, meeting times, project details, even the weather on certain days. Dry facts, but facts that matched the questionable deals I was uncovering. And then I found it. An entry from 11 years ago, the day my oldest son had handled the sale of a lakeside property I'd once co-owned with my late wife. I remembered thinking the price was low at the time, but he'd insisted it was the best offer on the market. The documents I now held told a different story. The buyer? A shell company that no longer existed. The resale? Triple the original price, 6 months later. My children hadn't just erased me from their version of the past. They'd been erasing me from my own assets for years. I stayed up until 2 a.m. building a clean, chronological binder. Dates, names, figures. A story anyone could follow, especially a journalist or a detective. It was a strange feeling, cataloging my own betrayal like evidence in a trial. But with each page, my anger became something sharper. Not wild, not reckless. Controlled. Directed. They thought I was sentimental, that I'd die clinging to the idea of family no matter how many times they rewrote it. They were wrong. I didn't want apologies. I wanted witnesses. And soon, I'd have them. The first strike had to look like nothing at all. Not a confrontation. Not a warning. Just a subtle movement under the surface, the kind of thing they wouldn't notice until it was too late to undo. That morning, I drove to the offices of a local TV station, one of the few in the area still running in-depth investigative pieces. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want a receptionist shuffling me off to a voicemail box. Instead, I walked straight in with my binder under my arm and asked for the senior investigative producer by name. 5 minutes later, I was in a glass-walled office with a man whose job was to recognize a good story when it fell in his lap. I'm going to give you something, I said, sliding the binder across his desk. It's documented, verifiable, and ugly. but it's also local. The people involved are respected in the community. They host charity events. They get glowing write-ups in the paper. And they've been laundering money through fake property deals for years. His eyebrows inched upward. You're sure about your evidence? Every date, every figure, every transfer is backed by an official record, I said. I'm not here to speculate. I'm here to hand you the truth gift wrapped. He flipped through the pages, his expression tightening with each turn. You realize this won't just stay between you and them. This is going to explode. That's the point, I said. I left him with the binder and my card, giving only one condition. If you run it, it airs on the 17th at 7 o'clock sharp. The 17th. The night of the annual family dinner. It wasn't the only seed I planted that day. From a payphone in an old strip mall, one of the last still standing, I made 3 anonymous calls to tip lines. One to the state tax enforcement office. One to the county fraud division. One to a regional mortgage fraud task force. I didn't give names. Just enough detail to make them look in the right direction, details that would match perfectly when the TV piece aired. By evening, I was back at my kitchen table, sipping tea and reading the paper. On the surface, it was an ordinary day. But the wheels were already turning in rooms my children didn't know existed. They still thought they controlled the family narrative, that their version of history would be the only one anyone remembered. What they didn't realize was that by the time the cameras rolled, I'd made sure the right people would be watching, with notebooks in hand and warrants ready. The first strike wasn't about hitting them. It was about removing their ability to get back up. And the moment they realized what was happening, they'd already be flat on the floor. The thing about escalation is, it only works if you let them feel safe first. I spent the next week doing nothing that would make them suspicious. No calls. No visits. No cryptic text messages. I wanted them relaxed, confident that I'd swallowed the insult and gone back to playing the silent, sidelined patriarch. But behind that stillness, I kept tightening the screws. Every day, I fed the TV station more material. Copies of cashier's checks. Email threads confirming forged signatures. Property tax records showing suspicious underpayments. I didn't have to embellish, the truth was scandal enough. Meanwhile, the calls I'd made to the tax office and fraud division began to bear fruit. One contact called me back in the evening, his voice low and cautious. Whoever tipped us off, we've got multiple overlapping leads now. Your people are in the middle of it whether they know it or not. They know, I said quietly. They just think they're untouchable. Not for long. Exactly the phrase I wanted to hear. 2 days before the dinner, I made my final move. I walked into the florist's shop in town and ordered a single centerpiece arrangement for the event. My name would be on the card, but the flowers would carry more than roses. Nestled discreetly between the blooms was a small flash drive in a clear plastic envelope. On it, the same binder I'd given to the TV station. I paid in cash. That evening, I took a slow drive past my son's house. Through the front window, I could see them setting the table for the big night, polished silverware, crystal glasses, every detail perfect. I pictured the scene on the 17th, the warm chatter, the smell of food, the smiles. And then, 7 o'clock would come. The broadcast. Faces turning toward the television. The reporters voice reading words they never thought would leave a living room. Photos of them on the screen, not the carefully curated family album, but mugshot clear images from property filings and court documents. I knew how people worked. Once the story was public, the phone calls would start within minutes from neighbors, clients, concerned friends. By the time the knock on the door came, they'd already be scrambling, saying the wrong things to the wrong people. And I would be there to watch it all unfold. That night, as I locked up and turned off the lights, I realized something. The past few weeks had stripped away whatever illusion of family I'd been holding on to. What was left was pure strategy, a campaign with a single objective, make sure they could never pretend again. They'd taken me out of the family story. Now I was making them the headline. The first sign came the morning before the dinner. I was sitting at my kitchen table, coffee in hand, when a local news teaser played on the radio. A woman's voice, clipped and professional. Tomorrow night, an exclusive investigation into a respected family business and the financial secrets they don't want you to know. No names. No details. But I knew that tone. The segment was locked. By mid-afternoon, the ripple had reached them. My middle son, Thomas, called out of the blue. "Hey, Dad." "You. Hear anything strange lately?" His voice was casual, but too controlled, like someone balancing a glass on a knife's edge. "Strange," I said. "Plenty of things are strange, Thomas." He hesitated. "About the news." I let a silence stretch just long enough for him to fill it. "I mean, somebody's been asking questions about the business. Weird questions. Like, digging." "You don't say." I sipped my coffee. "Well, I've got nothing for you, son." When I hung up, I pictured him walking into the dining room, telling the others, eyes narrowing, wondering which of their trusted acquaintances had started talking. The paranoia was the first crack in their armor. But it wasn't just paranoia. That evening, I took a quiet drive past my daughter's house. A for sale sign stood in the yard, fresh and too soon. They hadn't mentioned moving, which meant they were scrambling for liquidity. Selling now, in this market, was desperation, not strategy. The next morning, a friend in the county clerk's office sent me a text. 3 lien searches came through on your family's companies today. State Fraud Division. Clock's ticking. Perfect. Pressure does strange things to people. The more they feel it, the more mistakes they make. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the little hardware store downtown, the one run by an old golfing buddy of mine. While we talked, his nephew, who handled deliveries, wandered in and started chatting about a catering job his friend had landed. "Big fancy dinner, tomorrow night," he said. Same people who just canceled half their order cause they had to pay the deposit in cash. Cash. For a family that prided itself on spotless credit, that was another warning flare. They were bleeding, but trying to look healthy. That night, I opened a fresh notebook and started a new page, observed weaknesses. Every crack went on the list. Asset sales. Canceled orders. Lien searches. Sudden credit shifts. By the time I closed the book, I realized something had shifted in me. At first, this had been about restoring my place in the truth, proving I was part of the story they'd stolen. But now it was about momentum. About watching them try to plug leaks in a ship that was already underwater. And the best part? Tomorrow night, the tide would rise so fast they wouldn't even have time to swim. The morning of the dinner, I woke up calm. Not the false calm you force over nerves, but the quiet steadiness of someone who's already played the last move in his head 100 times. Everything was set. The broadcast slot was confirmed. The investigators I'd tipped off were on standby. Even the florist delivery, my little gift wrapped in roses, was scheduled for 3 o'clock sharp. By 10 a.m., the weather had turned cold and brittle. I drove into town, not because I needed to do anything, but because I wanted to see their faces in the hours before the curtain lifted. At the bank, I happened to bump into my eldest. He didn't notice me at first, too busy arguing quietly with the loan officer in an office corner. But when he turned and saw me through the glass, his expression locked into something between annoyance and unease. He stepped out, pasted on a smile. "Dad, wasn't expecting you." "Life's full of surprises," I said. "Hope you're ready for tonight." His smile faltered. "Yeah, sure." In the reflection on the polished tile floor, I caught his fingers drumming against his thigh. A man trying to keep still and failing. From there, I walked to the small print shop 2 blocks down. The owner, an old friend, had run off 12 extra copies of my evidence packets, just in case. They were already in my car, sealed in manila envelopes. Tonight, those copies would leave my hands and enter theirs, the friends, the neighbors, the associates who'd believed the image my family sold them. By early afternoon, reports began to trickle in. My contact at the county clerk's office texted, "Fraud Division filed preliminary asset freeze paperwork. Expect movement after news piece airs." Movement. Exactly the word I wanted to hear. At 3:15, the florist van pulled away from their driveway. I could picture the scene inside, my wife reading the card aloud, everyone smiling politely at the gesture, never guessing that the neat little bouquet contained the first nail in their public coffin. Back home, I changed into the same dark suit I'd worn to my wife's funeral. Not because I wanted to mourn tonight, but because, in a way, something else was about to be buried. By 6 o'clock, I was parked 2 houses down from the dinner, engine off, radio low. The street was lined with cars. Through the wide front windows, I could see the glow of the dining room, hear faint bursts of laughter carried on the cold air. I checked my watch. 6:57. 3 minutes until their story, the one they'd built on lies, omissions, and stolen credit, would be replaced with the one I'd written for them. And when the knock came afterward, it wouldn't be me at the door. It would be the law. 7 o'clock on the dot, the glow from their living room flickered. Through the front window, I saw heads turn toward the television mounted on the far wall. The laughter stopped mid-sentence. The voice of the anchor came first, calm, authoritative. Tonight, a joint investigation reveals allegations of financial fraud, forgery, and property laundering involving a prominent local family. The camera cut to the reporter I'd met in that glass-walled office, binder open on his desk. He spoke directly to the lens, each word precise. As he outlined the timeline, property sales at suspiciously low values, forged cosigner documents, shell companies dissolving just before audits, images appeared on screen. Images of my children, my son-in-law, smiling in photos pulled from public records and social media. And then the documents. Signatures compared side by side. Screenshots of municipal filings. Bank transfers that led nowhere legitimate. From my car, I could almost feel the air inside that house go thin. The reporter's voice kept going. County officials confirmed they are reviewing this evidence, with further action possible in the coming days. Possible. I smiled. He was being careful, but I knew what was already in motion. Inside, someone stood up abruptly, my eldest, pacing behind his chair, gesturing toward the TV as if he could wave it into silence. My daughter clutched her wine glass with both hands, knuckles white. My wife didn't move at all. The segment ended with the anchor's promise. We'll continue following the story as it develops. And that's when the knock came. I didn't need to hear it to know how it would sound sharp, commanding, followed by the rustle of jackets and the clipped voices of officers who don't make social calls. Through the window, I saw the flash of badges, the stiff posture of people trying to look calm when every nerve in their body was firing. The officers stepped inside. The sound of paper warrants being read carried faintly through the cold. One guest stood up, eyes wide, like they'd stumbled into the wrong dinner party. My son-in-law's face was the best part. A forced smile, nodding as if he were being reasonable, all while his gaze darted for an escape that didn't exist. 10 minutes later, the front door opened again, this time with them between 2 officers, walking into the night. Cameras from the TV crew, parked discreetly up the street, turned to follow. I stayed in my car until the last squad vehicle pulled away. They'd tried to erase me from the family story. Tonight, they'd been written into a different kind of record. And it was only going to get worse for them. I didn't follow them to the station. That would have been too easy. Instead, I waited. Let the chaos settle into that uncomfortable stillness that comes when adrenaline burns off and the weight of reality takes its place. By the next morning, I knew they'd be out on conditional release. Not freedom, just a pause before the real storm. The call came at 8:42 a.m. My wife's number, but her voice was smaller than usual. Can we talk? I let a few seconds pass. About what? They said you are the source. For the story. For all of it. They're right, I said. Silence. Then, they're saying you've destroyed our family. No, I replied, calm as I could be. I've archived it. There's a difference. By noon, they were at my door, all of them. My wife, my 2 children, the son-in-law still looking like a man trying to figure out which way the wind was blowing. The air between us was heavy. I didn't invite them in. I let them stand there on the porch, the cold pressing in around their words. You could have come to us, my daughter said first. We could have worked it out. You came to me once, I said. The night you rewrote my life in front of 50 people. You worked it out then, decided I didn't belong. My son stepped forward. Dad, the news made it sound worse than it is. We didn't forge signatures? Hide income? Sell property through shells? I didn't make any of that up, son. You did the math yourselves. I just wrote it down. The son-in-law finally spoke. You've humiliated us in front of the whole town. You're welcome, I said. Humiliation is still cheaper than prison. They exchanged looks, a quick little counsel of the cornered. My wife tried one more angle. We can make this go away if you'll just help us. Testify that it's a misunderstanding. That you were mistaken. Mistaken? I stepped out onto the porch with them, closing the distance. Mistaken is calling your kid by the wrong name. Mistaken is forgetting your anniversary. What you did isn't a mistake. It's fraud. It's theft. And it's documented 6 ways from Sunday. You're destroying your own blood, my son said, his voice sharp now. You erase me first, I said. I'm just putting something in the blank space you left. The wind cut through us, carrying the weight of what none of them wanted to say. They had no bargaining power left. I could see the moment it sank in, that I wasn't bluffing, that there was no soft landing coming, no second act where we all hugged and cried about misunderstandings. This wasn't about forgiveness. It was about truth, and control, and making sure the next chapter didn't belong to them. Finally, my wife turned, walking toward the car. The others followed, but not before my son-in-law muttered, "You'll regret this." Maybe, I said, meeting his eyes. But you'll remember it. I stood there on the porch, watching them drive away. I knew it was the last time we'd all be in the same place without lawyers present. Tomorrow, the official charges would be filed. And with them, the final draft of our family history, one they couldn't edit. The day the charges went public, I didn't even have to turn on the TV. The news found me. Neighbors knocking on the door under the guise of returning tools they'd borrowed years ago. Old colleagues calling, their voices thick with curiosity and that unspoken I read about it in the paper. Even the cashier at the grocery store gave me a slow, almost respectful nod as she rang me up. By 9 a.m., every outlet in the region had run the headline, "Local family indicted in multi-year fraud scheme." Beneath it, photos, the same smiling faces from that slideshow weeks earlier, now cropped from mugshots and court appearances. My children, my son-in-law, my wife in the background, head down, trying to hide behind a jacket collar. The article laid it out cleanly: counts of fraud, forgery, money laundering, and conspiracy. Amounts. Dates. The pattern so obvious you could teach it in a seminar. And there it was in print. Evidence compiled by a family member led to the investigation. No name needed. Everyone knew. I spent the morning on the back porch with a pot of coffee, watching the winter sun crawl across the yard. It was quiet, but not the hollow quiet of before. This was the stillness of a job finished, of a balance sheet finally reconciled. The calls from them started around noon. First my wife, then my daughter, then my son. I didn't answer any of them. The voicemails were all the same. We need to talk. This isn't fair. You don't understand what you've done. I understood perfectly. By mid-afternoon, my contact at the TV station called. You see the coverage? I have, I said. You should know. The story's getting picked up nationally. Wire services are running with it. This is going to stick. Good, I said, and meant it. At 4 o'clock, I walked into town. The hardware store owner nodded when I passed. The postman actually stopped his truck to shake my hand. In a small place like ours, reputations travel faster than fact, and mine had just been rewritten in a way I could live with. When I got home, the house was warm. I poured myself a drink, not the cheap stuff I'd been rationing, but the good bourbon I'd been saving for years. I sat in my chair, glass in hand, and looked at the framed photos on the wall. The ones with me in them. The ones they couldn't erase. For a long while, I just sat there, letting the weight of it settle. Not the weight of guilt, that was gone, but the weight of finality. Whatever we'd been as a family, it was over. And what came next, they'd have to face without me. As the sun dipped and the shadows stretched across the living room, I said it aloud for the first time, letting the words taste the air. You erased me from the story. I made you the story, and now it's archived in the police records. No one was there to hear it. That was fine. The right people already had. Outside, the street was quiet. In the distance, a siren wailed, "Not for me, not anymore." I took another sip and leaned back, the last page written, the book closed. Some stories you inherit, others you have to write yourself. This one was mine.